The sea has a memory, or so the old sailors used to say. They spoke of ships carrying more than cargo, ghosts, curses, the restless dead clinging to the timbers. I laughed once. Now I know better. I signed on as a deckhand aboard the Erebus Star, a 3-masted brigantine bound for the Indies. She was old even then, her planks weathered, her sails patched with mismatched cloth. The captain said she had character. I thought she had rot. The crew muttered that she was unlucky, but wages are wages, and I needed the coin. From the first night at sea, the ship felt off. The wood groaned more than the wind demanded. Shadows pooled in the corners below deck, stubborn against lantern light. At night, I heard things moving. Chains, rattling though secured. Barrels, rolling though wedged. The bosun blamed careless knots. I knew knots. Something else was untying them. By the third day, the whispers began. At first faint, barely more than the sea's sigh against the hull. But they grew louder, threading between our breaths, curling in our ears when we tried to sleep. Not words exactly, more like the sound of your own name spoken by someone who has never owned a tongue. We lost Anders first. He was climbing the rigging when the ropes gave way, though none had been cut. He hit the deck with a crack that silenced even the gulls overhead. The carpenter swore he'd checked those lines himself, strong as iron. That night, Anders' boots walked the deck long after his body had been consigned to the sea. We all heard them. Heavy, limping, dragging. The poltergeists made themselves known with violence. Lanterns shattered though untouched. Knives hurled across the galley, burying themselves in the wood beside men's heads. A cask of fresh water split open from within, soaking our stores, though the wood bore no crack. The crew began crossing themselves, muttering prayers under breath, staring at shadows as though daring them to move. Hammocks swung violently with no one near them. Sleep was impossible. Cold hands brushed faces in the dark. A voice like the captain's ordered men aloft in the middle of the night, though he slept soundly in his cabin. Once I woke to find my sea chest open, every item floating inches above it, slowly turning in the still air before crashing down all at once. The sea itself seemed complicit. Waves rose without wind, slamming against the hull in rhythmic pounding, as though something beneath struck from below. The sails snapped and billowed, though the air was dead calm. The ship groaned like a beast in agony, every plank straining against itself. On the 7th night, the storm hit. Black clouds rolled in, blotting out the moon, rain lashing like claws. Lightning split the sky, and in each flash I saw them, shapes half-formed, bodies of mist clinging to the rigging, faces pressed against the cabin windows, hands clawing the wheel, though no man stood there. The poltergeists raged. Every hatch blew open, every door slammed. The galley knives flew like gulls, one grazing my cheek as I ran. Chains whipped through the air, striking men down. I saw Jenkins lifted clean off his feet, flung screaming into the sea by nothing at all. His voice carried even after the waves swallowed him, echoing across the deck though his body was gone. I tried to cling to the mast, but invisible fingers pried at my grip, cold and relentless. The rigging lashed out, wrapping around wrists and throats. Barrels rolled of their own accord, crushing legs, breaking bones. The captain bellowed orders no one could follow, his words drowned by the cacophony of shrieks, some human, some not. Then came the final horror. The ship itself moved without us. The wheel spun though no hands touched it, sails adjusted though no man hauled them. The Erebus Star steered into the blackest part of the storm, as if compelled by a will older than wind or tide. Lightning struck the mast, splitting it in two, flames erupting even in the rain. And through the fire and storm, the shadows gathered, faces of those we'd lost, eyes empty, mouths wide in silent screams. I don't remember how I survived. I awoke clinging to wreckage, the sea calm, the sky bright with dawn. No ship remained, no crew, only me. They say I'm lucky. I don't feel lucky. At night, when I close my eyes, I hear the creak of timbers, the whisper of ropes, the footsteps of dead sailors pacing above me. The Erebus star is gone, but she isn't finished with me. Not yet. I shouldn't have come here. The locals whispered about this dungeon for decades, calling it cursed, haunted, a place where people went and never returned. I laughed at them. Foolish pride, that's all. But curiosity is a cruel master. The entrance yawned before me, a jagged hole in the side of a crumbling cliff. Inside, the air was heavy with moisture and the metallic tang of rusted chains. My torch cut a narrow line through the darkness, illuminating walls streaked with mold and scratches deep into the stone. Something had been trapped here, and still was. The first signs were subtle, a sudden cold draft brushing my neck, the faint echo of laughter that didn't belong to me. Then came the footsteps, behind me, above me. Every direction, yet no one was visible. I clung to the thought of it being the wind, the acoustics of the dungeon. But then the stone shifted. A wall groaned as though breathing, and the floor trembled under invisible weight. Objects in the corridor rattled. My own torch flickered violently, and I felt a push at my shoulder, though no one was there. Poltergeists. That's what my grandmother called them. The spirits that thrived on fear, that hurled objects, twisted space, and delighted in tormenting the living. I had mocked her stories, but now I felt their presence, pressing close, unseen but palpable. I tried to get out of there. The corridors twisted, and every step seemed to echo into infinity. Rocks and debris skittered across the floor ahead of me. Chains rattled from above. A torch, mounted to the wall, was flung toward me, spinning through the air and clattering at my feet. I scrambled aside. "Why are you here?" a voice whispered, faint and mocking, echoing from every shadow at once. I recognized my own tone, warped and strange, bouncing from every wall. I turned a corner and collided with a wooden door. It swung open violently on its own, slamming me against the wall. The corridor beyond was empty until the shadows coalesced. Rocks, bones, shards of glass lifted into the air, spinning and darting at me like vipers. I barely ducked in time, my cheek grazed by something cold and sharp. I bolted through the hallways. The poltergeists were everywhere. A chandelier swung down from the ceiling, narrowly missing my head. Rusted cages rattled open, metal bars twisting as though animated by unseen hands. Whispering voices layered atop one another, rising to a cacophony that made my ears ache. I stumbled into a chamber. The walls were covered with inscriptions in blood, names, dates, curses. Objects rose into the air, a skull, a shattered jug, even a broken chair. They spun around me in a storm, propelled by some malevolent intelligence. The poltergeists toyed with me, pushing, shoving, testing my panic, delighting in my desperation. I crawled behind a fallen pillar, clutching my chest, gasping. My torch fell and went out, leaving me in darkness so complete it pressed against my skull. I could hear their laughter, whispers, the scraping of unseen fingers along stone. I reached for the torch, but hands, cold, invisible, shoved me to the ground. The air grew icy, my breath forming clouds. From the shadows, voices spoke in unison, my voice and others. "You cannot leave. You belong to us." Rocks and debris slammed into me, pinning me down. I felt a cold, spectral touch on my face, then across my chest, pushing me further into the stone floor. Every instinct screamed to fight, but I was too weak, too small, too human. And then there it was, a mass of shadows rising above me, shapes coalescing into humanoid forms, their edges flickering, faces indistinct yet grotesquely familiar. They drifted above me, eyes glowing faintly in the darkness, arms stretching unnaturally as if to grasp my soul. I screamed, but the sound was absorbed, swallowed by the oppressive weight of their presence. They circled, a whirlwind of anger and malice, throwing shards, chains, debris, all moving with purpose, intent, and cunning. The dungeon itself seemed to pulse with their energy. Every corridor, every chamber, every corner was alive, feeding on my fear. I was trapped, hunted, alone, but not alone. And as the shadows descended, pressing closer, I knew the poltergeists didn't need to kill me outright. They only needed to break me, to twist my mind until I was no longer myself. The last thing I felt was cold hands closing over my eyes, dragging me into darkness. My own voice whispered from everywhere at once. "You will never leave." The dungeon exhaled, and I ceased to exist. They closed Halloween Castle without warning. One day, tourists were queuing at the gates for the daily tours. The next, the place was locked and abandoned. Signs posted that simply read, "Closed until further notice." No explanation, no press release, nothing. I couldn't leave it alone. Castles don't just shut down. I'd been there before as a child, back when the guides cheerfully spun tales of medieval sieges and royal intrigue. I remembered the echo of boots in long stone corridors, the smell of dust and old wood, and I remembered one guide whispering as if by mistake, "Sometimes the castle doesn't like to be disturbed." So when I found an unlocked side gate one rain-soaked evening, curiosity overcame caution. My lantern barely cut through the damp fog as I slipped inside. The courtyard was slick with moss, the windows black like blind eyes. The silence inside was unnatural. No creak of wood, no scurrying rats, no distant hum of plumbing, just air heavy with stillness. My footsteps seemed too loud, bouncing back at me from the vaulted ceilings. I told myself the place was empty, but the sound of another step followed mine, a half-second late, like an echo too slow. I pressed deeper into the halls, past faded tapestries that shifted, though no breeze stirred. The great dining hall stretched cavernous before me, the long table covered in a layer of dust thick enough to choke on. Yet the chairs scraped back, one by one, as though unseen guests had just risen. My lantern flickered, shadows stretching long across the stone. The poltergeists announced themselves in bursts of violence. A goblet shot from the table, clattering across the floor. Doors slammed behind me with bone-jarring force. A suit of armor toppled, its pieces scattering at my feet, though I hadn't touched it. My heart hammered, and I forced myself to keep moving. I wasn't ready to admit the truth yet. In the chapel, pews shook, as if rocked by invisible hands. Hymn books flung themselves open, pages tearing, words smearing like blood across the parchment. The altar candle ignited, fire blooming from nowhere. And over it all rose the whispers, dozens of them, layered, overlapping, speaking words I couldn't quite catch. They grew louder until they became screams. I stumbled into the servant passages, narrow stairways twisting down into the bowels of the castle. The air turned colder the deeper I went, and the stone walls wept with condensation. Something yanked at my coat hard enough to spin me. No one stood there. My lantern nearly slipped from my grip, and I realized if I lost the light, I'd never find my way out. In the dungeon, I learned why the castle had been closed. The cells weren't empty. Shackles rattled, as if straining against wrists that weren't there. Bones littered the floors, old but newly scattered, as if something had been pawing through them. A rack creaked, as though bearing fresh weight, ropes stretching taut. The air was alive with fury. Decades of torment compressed into invisible fists that beat against the walls. Then, the full force of them fell upon me. The lantern shattered, plunging me into darkness. Chains whipped through the air, striking the walls inches from my skull. Rocks pelted from nowhere, bouncing off my shoulders. Cold hands clutched at my arms, my throat, trying to drag me down. I screamed and swung wildly at nothing. The worst was the voices. They spoke my name, over and over in tones of mockery, of pleading, of rage. Come with us, stay with us, die with us. I bolted, feeling my way blindly through passages that seemed to twist and change behind me. The castle itself shifted, leading me deeper instead of out. At last, some desperate instinct brought me stumbling into the great hall again. Moonlight filtered weakly through broken windows, and I sprinted toward it, ignoring the chairs hurling themselves into my path. Something slammed into my back, pitching me forward, but momentum carried me through the doors and out into the night. I collapsed in the wet grass, gasping. Behind me, the castle stood silent, windows dark, as if nothing had stirred inside. But I knew better. I knew why they had closed it. Halloween Castle doesn't want visitors anymore. And if you're foolish enough to enter, the poltergeists will make certain you never leave.